Welcome to the second episode of PCB Cast for 2024. Today, the topic for discussion is Turkey. It's an area where PCB have been very focused over the last couple of years, and we're proud to say that we have a Turkish-speaking solicitor in our team, Gamze Gonal, who will be joining us for the discussion. Also joining us is Tura of Cushman Wakefield. He's the chairman there in Turkey, and I will hand over to Tura to introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I run a real estate investment platform based in Istanbul in Turkey, and of which Cushman Wakefield's operation in Turkey is a part of. And I'm very delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Gamze, you've obviously been with PCB for nearly a couple of years and very much focused on Turkey. Do you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself and what you've been doing over in Turkey for the last year or so?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a qualified solicitor in the UK and speak Turkish as well. And we've been focusing on the Turkish market, and we've been attending exhibitions in Istanbul to meet the Turkish buyers and to give them information all about how the conveyancing works in the UK.
Excellent. Thank you very much, both. So the reason we've been so focused on Turkey as a firm at PCB is it's been a really strong market for buying UK property over the last at least 2, possibly 3 years. We've actually been supporting the Turkish market for over 10 years. And I remember when I joined the firm, we were seeing a lot of buyers who were buying in the Riverlight development, the first development in Nine Elms, and we all know what's happened there since we're now at about 25,000 new flats there. So Riverlight was a very pioneering development by Berkeley Homes in that area. And we had a strong contingent of Turkish buyers. So we've been dealing with the Turkish buying market during all that time, but it's only really in the last 2 to 3 years that we've really seen a big uptick in interest, and the volume is paling into comparison what we were used to dealing with back in those days. Tura, what do you put down to being the main reasons and drivers behind this trend of Turkish buyers into the UK market?
There's a couple of things coming together here, and actually the reason why we've been looking in more detail into this is actually demand and requests. Yes, for the past 10 years or so, every once in a while, we've been referring buyers and occupiers to the UK, mainly for operational reasons, commercial real estate, etc. But for the last year or so, again, on the back of this increasing demand and requests from Turkish high net worth individuals, etc., for residential property has increased, and that has led us to formalize this more and look into it in more detail, maybe the last year or so. And we operate this business under the TR International brand. So this is really dealing with property abroad, mainly residential, with the aim to help Turkish buyers do acquisitions. And so the main reasons is twofold. One is push. Is very well known that we've had an issue in Turkey with high inflation. So the last couple of years, but especially the last 2 years, we've seen inflation going up to 80%. So that's 80, going back down to 40, and now going up again to 60%. So that puts a lot of strain on investors, on investments. And so the devaluation of the Turkish currency is another push factor. But apart from that, and for the UK in particular, I think we've seen very strong fundamentals post-Brexit. There's a strong demand from all over the world. The makeup maybe has changed. Maybe it used to be more from the Far East. It has maybe changed, but it looks like there's still a very strong demand. It seems like there's lack of supply in many parts of the world. And so there's a strong fundamental element to it. The other point is really that markets, maybe not so much in London in many places, but places like Manchester, you see a lot of development, you see a lot of capital appreciation on the back of that, gentrification projects, large-scale projects, and that is also very interesting to Turkish buyers. But what makes the UK really unique in terms of international markets for Turkish buyers is the availability of mortgage. Yes, interest rates have peaked with geopolitical issues, Ukraine war, etc. But we also see a downward trend. But just the simple fact that mortgage is available for foreign buyers, non-resident foreigners, is very important, and it's pretty much unique to the UK. And by investing in the UK, what are Turkish buyers really looking to achieve is, first of all, maybe diversification of investments, foreign currency income, but a lot of times, and that's very interesting, is education. People just sending their kids to the UK for education, university, etc. And then London really stands out from that point of view, but other markets as well. We're seeing a lot about Manchester, but also other markets across the UK. So if we put all of that together, the UK is very appealing, but a lot of push and pull factors that makes it really interesting for Turkish buyers to invest in property.
Excellent. So you've answered quite a few questions for us there. So I was going to ask you about what's making people want to invest away from Turkey, i.e. Turkish investors looking further afield. And it sounds like inflation, as we would expect, is a major component in that, and not surprising that you're seeing that as a main driver. What I thought was really interesting about what you just said was the pull factors for the UK market. So I was going to ask, what specifically, given that you are familiar with presumably a wide range of overseas destinations for your clients and your buyers, and you probably see them invest in all sorts of places, what is it specifically about the UK that is drawing such good crowds and good interest? And the finance is quite unique to the UK, you said. So you don't see other jurisdictions having that same kind of finance availability for buyers from Turkey. Have I got that right?
Exactly. Not really. So typically where would Turkish buyers look into, there's a couple of destinations with golden visa regimes there. The motivation is different. So occupancy permit related drivers then are more important than the real estate aspect. But financing, we don't really come across that in other markets. Pockets in the US maybe, but across Europe, certainly not. And that is where the UK real estate market for Turkish buyers stand out. And to be fair, generally speaking, investing abroad is still fairly new for many Turkish buyers. But if they do, they will have invested mainly in the UK because it's in a very stable market, and people just know it better than other places. And there will be people in their environment who will have done something who they can then ask. It's mainly around financing and the familiarity with the UK market and London in particular.
How does it work with Turkish buyers locally in their own jurisdiction with finance? Is it typical to use a mortgage when buying your own home or even an investment property within Turkey? Is Turkish buyers used to using finance locally, and it's just that overseas there aren't many options, or is it something that's quite unusual to them even buying property in Turkey?
Financing is very common actually, but it becomes extremely limited when you're at a level of, we're at 50% policy rate, interest rates. That just makes it doesn't make any sense. So, and this has been the case, this excessively high interest rate was just basically prohibiting using financing. And if you look at it, because of historically also, it's going up and down, but historically interest rates have been higher in Turkey compared to other places. There's no real mortgage in the sense when you compare it to the UK or the US, for instance. You can't get 30-year mortgage terms. That's just not happening. And as I said, it just gets to a point where it doesn't make any sense at all if you've got interest rates of 50% or more, for instance. Yes, people know it, but I think the mortgage market is also obviously very established, but also very deep. You get a whole lot of options and alternatives for mortgage financing. And that makes it really attractive. And that's where Turkish buyers really, they've got a learning curve there and understanding, oh, okay, this is very different than what we have in Turkey. So yes and no to answer your question.
Excellent. No, that's really insightful. It's not something that I personally have given a lot of thought to before. We're so used to using mortgages, and especially with overseas buyers who PCB really focus on, I think we take it for granted that it's available. I hadn't really considered that it might not be available in other countries, or even an attractive thing to do locally where interest rates are really high. So what's really fascinating about what we've said so far, Tura, is perspective that yourself and the Turkish buyers seem to have about the UK, the sentiment, because anyone who listened to our episode 1, our most recent podcast, where we were talking about London, we actually concluded that it's been a little bit lost in the noise of all the negative press about and brand Britain being really beaten down over the last few years, especially since Brexit. But actually, the fundamentals of buying in the UK and especially London, more and more so now Manchester, as that becomes a very solid reputationally and just a very thriving city, is that actually the fundamentals and the reasons and the attractiveness, what makes it attractive to buy into the UK property market, are still all there. The lack of supply, the stability of the, dare I say it, the stability of the government, certainly the legal system. Although on the surface it appears to be in a bit of a mess, actually the fundamentals are still very strong. And even to use the mortgage market as an example, if you were to read the press 12 months, even 6 months ago, the UK mortgage market has not been a very happy picture. But actually, for a Turkish buyer, it's a really attractive thing and something that they can't get anywhere else. So even though interest rates have shot up rapidly a year ago, thankfully they're now stable and going down a bit. But even that sort of very negative story from the press is actually still very much a positive when you scrape away the sort of temporary narrative. So that's been a really interesting thing to hear you talk about. And Gamze, we'll get into the legal side of the process and that kind of thing in a little while. What's been your conversations with buyers and clients that you've been acting for, and what's been your impression of the sentiment of Turkish buyers towards the UK market?
I think we've had inflation as well. We still have inflation, but when you compare it to Turkey, for them, it sounds so ridiculous. They actually laugh. They're like, oh, you don't know what the inflation is, the true meaning of inflation. Come to Turkey and see how it is. So that's one of the most interesting. Like, I always have some sort of conversation with Turkish buyers in regards to that. But overall, I think they see the market in the UK is more stable, and there's a lot more opportunity for them to invest. So if they invest in one property and then learn how that works, they can just continue doing the same with other investments as well. And so in that sense, it's all positive, and they understand how the market actually works well here, and that they are quite aware that there's always the value of their investments in property. So that's, I think, one of the most attractive things about investing in the UK, investing in property markets. So generally, it's been a good vibe that I've been getting from the Turkish buyers. And when I go through the legal process with them, they are quite surprised actually with why they require a solicitor or legal representative in the UK for such a simple transaction, because in Turkey it is such a simple transaction. They can just go into the registration center and then just register their name onto the title deed, and then that's done. They're the new owners of this property, and then they pay the purchase price and they just get the keys from there. But when I explain to them maximum it can take 4 to 6 weeks on each transaction, they're like, oh, so it doesn't take 2 weeks or a week? And then I go, no, we have to go by the regulations, and hence why, because you have to go through the regulations, you have to have a solicitor that represents you in that process. And when you explain to them why they need a legal representative is, and what the legal representative does, which practically everything for them in the transaction, then it assures them that, okay, like it sounds a lot better and it sounds legit. And they're happy to go on from there because I think Tora would agree as well with this culture difference is that Turkish people really do to be guided and their hands to be held throughout the transaction. They really value that. And because that means that you pay attention to them, you respect them, and that they are getting the service that they are paying for. So when I explain to them, you're paying for a service, but we will deal with everything from your stamp duty, from transferring your monies, and then instructing when the keys will be released, etc. Then that gives them a lot of reassurance.
Tuba, what's your take on that and the buyer's
Absolutely.
impression of having to use a lawyer in the UK?
Couldn't agree more. I think the point is what Gams also mentioned is that there is a difference for sure, between the two systems. There's things that are quite unique to the UK and which are in concept are very different than what we have here in Turkey. And working with a notary versus the title deed registry, that's two very different things. And there is a learning curve involved, and it's really important to have that guidance. And I think what we really value a lot is that Gamze, in fact, is Turkish, speaks Turkish, is a lawyer, and can help buyers through the process, because language barrier is also something. It's not just a concept. It's something maybe completely new to you. The system is different, and then it's far away, if you will. And if you then also have a language barrier, that makes it extremely difficult. And that's why we really value working with Turkish speakers, Turkish native speakers based there who know the system and who can help with the learning process as well. And it's not impossible. It's also not really all that hard. It's just the system is a little different. I think what we, and Gamze knows as well, the whole leasehold concept is different. You need to explain it. There's a lot of urban legend around it in Turkey. Mm-hmm. It's okay. What happens after the 999 years expire?
Yeah.
That's the kind of questions we sometimes get, but it's important to guide the buyers, ideally in Turkish, and then do it step by step. And then it's much less of an issue. In fact, no issue at all. It just takes a little bit of time, but it needs to be done. It has to be done.
Yeah, I'd just like to add something as well to that. Even though Turkish-speaking clients, the majority of them speak majority of them speak English as well. But what they really value is that having someone Turkish to guide them through, and just like what Tora said as well, just to answer their really, really different questions that you wouldn't really explain to them or anything like that, like 999 years or 250 years, or what would happen if my granddaughter and etc. and her daughter, what would happen if they inherit the property and everything like that. So I think being Turkish really gives them a lot of trust, and I think they value that a lot.
Yeah, I don't think you can really put a price on that. And I think Tura used the word familiarity. And as you say, Gamze, in a lot of the jurisdictions where we operate for overseas investors, we supply the languages. We have Chinese speakers, we have Arabic speakers in the firm. We obviously have yourself for the Turkish market. And it's not necessarily that they actually need that and they can't conduct business and communicate in English. It's just they're more comfortable doing it. There's that familiarity. It helps them to relax about the whole process a lot more. And it is a very daunting process. Probably buying anywhere in the world is if you're doing it locally, but doing it overseas, there's just so many extra layers of anxiety and things being alien that you're just constantly worrying about things that you perhaps haven't thought of. So being able to speak to someone who not only shares your language, but some of your cultural values and at least understanding makes a massive difference. And I don't think you can really put a value on it. It's funny, the question about the 999 years. Everywhere I go, we get asked that. It's something that I've spent quite a long time talking to the occasional Asian buyer in an exhibition room about, and really the conclusion is it would be a really nice problem to have, wouldn't it? If in 1,000 years' time we're still affected by that. But it is a quirk of the English legal system and property law in the UK. And I'm sure, as is often the case, possibly Gamze and I are coming across like lawyers like to overcomplicate things, which no one's ever accused them of before. But it is important to have not just the legal expert, but that guide really through the process as well. So it's funny, we come up against this everywhere we go. Turkey, there's a comparison between how things are done there, which Gamze's taken us through. In China, I understand in mainland China, there is no lawyer for a property transaction. And in Saudi Arabia, there's no paperwork. So you can imagine when we come to deal with buyers from those areas, how much of a leap and how much of a gap, a chasm there is that we need to fill in terms of the different processes. Although they may not understand initially what we're even there for, hopefully by the time they've dealt with us and we've walked them through it, that perception has changed and they understand the importance of it. You mentioned, Tura, a couple of times Manchester. So would you mind just sharing a bit about your views of where are the good locations for investment in the UK and where you're seeing investors buy, and perhaps maybe just look forward to the future a bit and see where you think those areas are either going to continue to be or perhaps new areas that might be emerging?
So I think it's fair to say when we started looking into this strategically about a year ago and decided to operate this part of our business under the TR International brand was, okay, what do buyers want? What do they need? And what it is that we can offer them uniquely. And the answer really is we've got access to international players. We've got knowledge or more experience in the international arena. And if you think of it, investing abroad can be a hassle, it can be difficult, it can be challenging. And what we wanted to do is to bring the best to the table, which is the best developers who bring the best products in the best locations. Doesn't mean it has to be the most expensive, but I think if you take, it's a hassle, but it's also risk investing abroad. So you want to be sure that if it's an ongoing project, you want to know that the developer delivers on time or delivers at all, etc. So what we've been trying to look at is work with the very best developers who have very unique, large-scale projects where we know it will add value because of the location, because of the concept, because of whatever it is. And so this is, I think, you can always find cheaper projects. You can always find projects where you have, a better IRR or return or whatever. But the point is, if you do an investment abroad, you want to limit your risk. And where we help them is basically bring that relationship, that experience on the table. So we're pretty much driven with, what delivers to the buyers a good risk reward balance. And in the case of Manchester, especially, what if I'd be a buyer, and I am a buyer, by the way, what I like about Manchester is there's been a lot of investment coming into Manchester, into the infrastructure, a lot of gentrification, infrastructure, a lot of education. Universities are very excellent. Large-scale companies are moving there. So what really convinced us was central locations, new locations, gentrification, where you add value. It's not just another project in some area. What we try to focus is what are the really strong players who produce very unique projects. Yeah. So fairly central, large scale, with a lot of amenities, etc., etc. What I like about Manchester is that it's a walkable city. It's especially the city center. You don't really even need public transport. So anything that is in the periphery to that and within walking distance to the center and the main places across Manchester, I think that adds a lot of value, that limits your risk, and ultimately, apart from the stable income, it gives you also a lot of capital appreciation, something that Turkish people are very familiar with, given what's been happening in Istanbul for the last 20, 25 years. To answer your question, can be anything, but if it ticks the boxes that I've just mentioned, in terms of location, in terms of the general makeup and setup, then I think it's something that we happily look into, because we are convinced that it will add a lot of value to the buyers, apart from just collecting rent.
Great. I'm glad you're so keen on Manchester. I think it's fairly common knowledge among the marketplace now that PCB are setting up in Manchester. We've taken some office space there, and we're going to be launching our new team in June. So we are really putting our money where our mouth is. We're not just talking Manchester up. We actually really believe in it. We're going to be there, and it's good to hear that it's got your seal of approval as well, Tuva. So I think it's also important and fitting that we mention Far East Consortium, because they were actually supporting us in our efforts in Turkey. We did a joint campaign there last year with them, and I believe they actually put us in touch with you, Tuba, so we've got them to thank for that as well. And they've literally just launched in Manchester, which we've been involved with. It was a global launch. We've helped them in the Middle East, we've helped them in Turkey, we've helped them in Asia, and it's been extremely successful. And that's their scheme is one of two big Manchester launches this year, the other being Renica, and both have sold phenomenally well. So really the proof is in the pudding with Manchester and the interest there and the capital growth potential and all that kind of thing. Really exciting city to be involved with, and really see it as having a bright future ahead of it. Where do you see London in terms of investment for Turkish buyers, and just generally give us your views on that?
I mean, it's very straightforward. London is London. People know London. People will have gone there, will have visited it. People will know people who have invested there before. It's a household name. It's a very stable market, but at the same time, there's also a lot of urban regeneration, gentrification going on, new infrastructure investments. So there's a bit of both worlds to be had, maybe not to the same extent as in Manchester, if you will. But I think it's what I like the most is it's big. It's got scale. Along with that, you've got a lot of infrastructure, and you don't have to explain London to people. People will just know it, and that really gets you ahead very quickly. And if you look at it, you've got the issues that I've mentioned before in terms of lack of supply, and there's still development activity ongoing. But yeah, the demand is just above supply at the moment. And what I think is also very important, and I meant to mention that before as well, is regulations. So there have been a lot of regulations all across Europe, but also the UK. So you want to own something that is still up to speed a couple of years down the road, because it costs a lot to retrofit. It makes it more difficult to lease out something if it doesn't fully meet newest regulations, etc. So that's something important, and that's why development activity, that's something I quite look into in very much detail.
Excellent. I think really it goes back to what we were saying earlier in the conversation about fundamentals, and the fundamentals in London are very strong. And I think you said demand outstripping supply. At the moment, I don't see that changing anytime soon, probably not in our lifetime. But that's the ultimate fundamental, isn't it? Demand and supply, and that's always been a very obvious story in London.
And education, universities, there's very few places in the world that beat London in terms of education and universities. It's a very important fact, regardless of what your motivation is. But strong education is the engine on what the economy and business run on, in my view, especially with there's a lot of discussion around lack of or shortage in labor force, skilled, educated labor force, and the amount, and you guys know this better, but the amount of international students in London and the amount of international students who want to actually stay in the UK, that is, I think that is a very important factor that will keep London ahead compared to other places in the world.
Definitely, and the surrounding areas as well. We've done some really great schemes in Cambridge recently, and we're actually this month involved with the launch of a development by Hill in Oxford, which is already selling brilliantly. And it's that education piece, isn't it, that's really driving that, and where we have just such a strong reputation and deserved reputation internationally. It's a place where everyone wants to be for education. I wanted to circle back around to that, actually, something you said earlier about that being a big pull factor for the UK and education. So that would imply then that the buyers that you're working with, they're not just purely investors, they're buying for their children to live in when they're studying. And what sort of mix of owner occupier versus investor do you see in the Turkish market?
Actually, a lot. To put it in numbers, it's more than half for sure. And a lot of times it's okay, my children will go to university, hopefully in London or anywhere in 2 years' time. Until then, I will lease it out. And while they study, they use it. I've got a place to stay when I go. And when they finish school, I lease it out again and have income. This is something we hear very often. A lot.
So more than half are fit that
absolutely.
profile.
I'd say probably 60% maybe, yeah, so something like that.
And they're a hybrid of investor and owner occupier, because they're keeping it long term as investment, but still wanting to use it for themselves. That's interesting.
Exactly. And what we hear also a lot is, okay, I've got a son or a daughter. They need a 1 bed, or make it 2 bedroom so that I have a room to stay when I visit them. So this is something that we hear very frequently. So it's interesting, maybe different than in other places, but something
it is interesting, and it really opens up the marketplace, because something that may just make complete sense as an investment doesn't always stack up necessarily from that point of view, but there are other factors that an owner occupier really value. So if you've got that blend of demand from both perspectives, then it means that some developments that just you need to fall in love with them a bit more to want to buy, which an investor doesn't have to do, then the Turkish buyers might be more inclined to take a long-term view on those and actually get the enjoyment out of the properties as well. That's really good to hear. Gamze, let's just have a look at the process, and what are the sort of typical things that you find you come up against with Turkish buyers in terms of process, and how do you best help them through that and guide them through the legal process?
Yeah, so first of all, I always try to explain to them in the most simple form of how the legal process works in the UK, and that would be putting them into 3 categories: doing the source of funds, and then reporting you with the contract, and then we proceed to exchange. The most difficulty, I would say, that I sometimes have with Turkish clients is the AML and source of funds. And that's not because that the clients are being difficult, and I think it's due to the fact that the way that their banking system and the way their business works as well is very different in Turkey. For example, if they're purchased as an individual and they have a business and they want the monies from their business, that they'll be using the monies that's coming from their business account, then the process is very different in that sense. But once we overcome that hurdle, then the rest of the process is quite simple, and just going through the contract with them. And majority of them, they read the contract, but I found this general query that they all ask: is there any general points or concerns that we should be aware of in this contract? And again, that shows that they really trust what you say. And obviously for the service that they paint as well, sometimes they really want you to reassure them. I think now I've found a good system to explain to the Turkish buyers in terms of why I need source of funds, why do I need to see a trail of funds, and where did the funds come from, etc. And I always make it clear to them. And I always say, look, I'm not suspicious of any transactions or anything. This is simply part of the UK regulations, AML regulations that I have to follow. It's because I will be checked on these files, on these matters, or any monies that come into the firm will need to be regulated and needs to be checked. Hence why I need these additional documents. I always make that clear, because I think what Tora said as well, going back to what he said, in Turkey with the transactions, money can be a bit of a sensitive topic over there, and they're not very open with in terms of like where the money comes from or anything like that. So you need to be very clear and explain to them that I'm not suspicious of anything. It's simply going through the process. I always have to explain to them or just make it clear from the outset that that's the reason why we have to ask for these sorts of funds.
I think it's probably one of the, if not the biggest gap, both in terms of process and regulation and culture, isn't it? Talking about the source of the funds and the regulations and requirements around that. Probably, I don't know how it works in Turkey, but nowhere near the same kind of process. And again, it's something we come up with all jurisdictions we work in. Again, to use China and Saudi Arabia as examples, didn't have any of that to deal with. And China being an example of a culture and a country that are very private about their wealth and their source of funds. So some quite difficult questions that we have to ask. And it's just a case of, as you say, Gamze, reassuring that buyers that this is completely confidential. We're not asking because we're nosy. We're asking because we're required to ask, and that information doesn't go anywhere. It's just to show that we've done the right checks. And everybody that we deal with and take on as clients are obviously the source of their funds are legitimate. So it's just a case of jumping through the hoops, really, and again making them buyers feel comfortable around that. So I think it would be amiss if we didn't mention an event that you attended recently, Gamze, with Berkeley Homes, which was a huge launch. And Berkeley Homes have been doing a lot in Turkey for the last couple of years. They've actually pioneered a lot of the efforts there from developers in the UK. And it was a really big event, wasn't it, that you attended? It was about a month ago, I think.
Yes. So the event was over 4 days, and 2 days out of the 4 was just pure seminars and exhibitions. And this is where the potential buyers, Turkish buyers, would come into the hotel. It was at the Mandarin Hotel in Istanbul. And we'll usually just talk to the Barclay Group sales representatives. And the remaining 2 days was just booking appointments with Turkish buyers and going through conversations such as the legal process. And there was a financial broker as well who would talk about the mortgage process in the UK, as well as the letting agents who would also discuss about what kind of letting options that they might have with specific developments. So it was I think it attracted about 400 people over the course of 4 days. Yeah.
I think am I right in thinking that they extended the event because it was so highly attended? Because I was in Dubai at the time, and half of the Barclay team who was supposed to be back in Dubai was still in Turkey doing these follow-up appointments you mentioned. So it seemed like there was a huge turnout and a lot of interest, and then consequently quite a lot of transactions as well.
Yeah, I'm not really sure actually if they extended, because I left on Monday. So the event took place from Friday. The exhibition started on Friday and then until Monday. And so I'm not really sure if they've extended it, but I know that they had a lot of follow-up to do. And I know that they reserved about I think it was over 30 reservations.
Yeah, phenomenal. So Gamze and I met with one of the Barclay team in London just shortly before that event, and the question on everyone's lips, Tura, which I'll hand over to you, is how long will this trend of really high interest and buying from Turkey into the UK go on for. What do you think?
So I think it would be wrong. It would be wrong to read the economical situation in Turkey as the only push factor. Yes, we did have some issues around inflation, weak currency, etc. But what we're also seeing is that we have an increased amount of high net worth individuals who are just thinking, look, my business is in Turkey, all my investments are in Turkey. Now it's time to expand. And why am I only looking at Turkey? Why am I not looking at investments abroad? Why am I not looking at real estate abroad? So there's a couple of things coming together here. And I think my answer would be, yes, there may be some volatility, on the back of, how the economy is going over the next couple of years. It will take time to beat inflation and, fix the situation around the currency. But I think interest in real estate abroad in UK or London in particular will outlive this, just for the simple reason that there are more and more people, that high net worth individuals who have done all their investing in their own country and who are now ready to invest abroad. So it's not only about that the economy is performing well and that there's capital flight or something like that. It's really more around diversification. I think that will outlive the current issues. And then there's obviously education. I don't see that going away anytime soon. It's just that the interest is there and that will stay. I'm pretty sure of that.
Certainly the success of the Berkeley event allayed any of those fears, at least for the time being, that it was only a temporary trend, and it seems to be still very much in full swing. And hopefully, as you say, that there is a longer term aspect to all of this, and all of the efforts and focus that the UK is putting into connecting with the Turkish buyers, and equally Turkish investors are taking in the UK, and then obviously the likes of yourselves being that bridge, will build a much more stronger foundation for it being a long-term relationship between Turkish investors and the UK property market, and long may it continue. Thank you very much both for your time today. How do people get in touch with you if they want to follow up and get some more information about investing into the UK market, especially from Turkey?
The easiest would be to visit our website, which is trinternationalliving.com, and then follow social media. That would be the easiest. And if they have shown interest in London property, we will have probably reached them anyways, digitally. And the other thing is that we are also planning events, not only in Istanbul, but across Turkey. We've done a whole bunch of events: Izmir, Ankara, Bursa, soon Adana, Gaziantep, and Bodrum in the summer. There will be plenty of opportunities to meet us on the ground as well across Turkey. So that's also something I would like to mention.
And presumably details of those events will be on your website if people wanted
Absolutely.
to have a look. And excellent.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
We are contactable via pcblawyers.com. You'll find both Gamze and I and the whole team on there. So if anybody wants to get in touch with us, they have any queries on the legal side of things, then we're always open to inquiries of that nature. And just leaves me to thank you again, Tura and Gamze, for your time today. And
thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me as well.
Over the last couple of months.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.